Hello. I believe very much in the importance during a performance of a concert, or recording obviously, for deferred audience, that the performer carries the artistic flame of the music he or she serves and transmits or translates, hyphening the performer through the performer with the audience, the composer's idea, a certain pedagogical aspect of the performance about discerningly displaying the voicings and painting soundscape by the different quality of touches when the texture is, let's say, polyphonic or rich in elements, in order to bring attention through the listening device without to appear to be teacherish. It's an interesting combination of things, because I notice when I play a piece that I've known and I practice, and I re-practice when I have to pick it back and bring it back, reheat it, so to say, I start hearing more things. It's a gift keep on giving, so that I didn't hear before, or as if in a certain way a prism of lights brings another vision of the piece. And to the point to which it can be disturbing, because it surprises me while I play it, while I know it. And so when I prepare a performance, I usually just enjoy sharing this, I don't know, cooked meal, if I cooked it well in the preparation, but when I serve it to the audience, I feel like I'm biased. I cannot be objective. And besides, what's the point of it? It's not because I place my persona more than the composer, not at all. It's just that I am alive and I'm there sharing it with the human beings who came to hear. And so I think very much in the fact that one can, of course, just play with feelings and say whatever. Just play all the notes, preferably the right notes. Is most pianists say I played it clean, or I played the right notes compared to the wrong. But there's so many different levels of notes in their hierarchy, in the structure of everything we play. Not that is to belittle the composer's quality choice, like Mademoiselle Boulanger used to say, la note choisie, for the chosen note for everything. So the detail, as much as the complete overview, are important, and of course we serve them through scores and published editions that give us every detail. But we shouldn't be reciting only syllabically. We should, well, of course we shouldn't. But the point is that by the time we try to render everything, we do inevitably some choices, which usually are vertical, in the sense that we hear the two hands. In this case, we hear the sequence in Bach's second partita's rondo. Since the French Baroque musicians wouldn't have written down the decorations, pedagogically Bach did in the score. So the question is, will I pedagogically play it too? Because I could say, if it's an interchangeable decoration, then I could do it again on the second performance of the sequence a step lower. Or then I can do the second one, which he chose to do an arpeggio. Then I could do it the first time also. But he doesn't give me the choice. And therefore I have to play his choice of 3 different types of decorations for the simple circle of fifths suspensions. And one could say, like in jazz music, we have the chart. Then I don't have to do much more than just play what's written, but then the decorations will become as meaningful as the lengthened sounds which he ties. And then he does this accelerando of triplets of 30 seconds, only at the third reiteration of the sequence. So it gives a solution when you play it like it's written, as if Bach suggested rhythmically an accelerando. First the simple escaped, then the arpeggio by 16ths, and then the triplets of 30 seconds. And inside this, given the fact that the piano is percussive, it's gonna be very heavy because you say every note, very note. And very often the pianists want to play clear and crisp, which they should. The fact is that you could also separate it and make it a three-dimensional touch by the first of each three. And then therefore you play softer the passing tones and more accented. Now that is becoming almost customized. It's like, do I have the right to, or should I project such a specific way of presenting the material rather than the raw material, every note equal importance. The suspensions, the decorations. So that would be more objective. And if I do something then I start shaping it, and therefore I serve it to the audience. For those who know the piece, they'll go, oh, okay. Yes or no, why? But those who don't know the piece, they might discover it, and if in a way that lightness of touch with these voiced little impulses lightens up the touch from the heavy hammer instrument compared to the harpsichord bar head that was plucked, they might like it more than if somebody plays. But it is correct, except that I think is wrong. And I was often wondering, is that added value to the interpretation through the shaping or customization of the texture? I don't speak about even creating voicing, which I indulge too much. But in a way, the indication of the voicings is hardly written if we wanted to have an objective fact by the dead composer. In this case, for instance, I mean, the piece starts with a two-voice invention style, genre. And then three-voice. This goes through only a few seconds, not even, this whole sequence. Lifetime of thinking, a few seconds to play. And the people who hear it once, at least in the performance. So that's why I was thinking to share with you about the fact that I think there is some portion of the performance where you play with your instinct, you play with your artistry, or whatever you consider play artistic for the piece that you play. And at the same time, you want to bring the texture readable to the listener, if I may say so. Not textually by only playing correctly the text, but also by shaping the presentation. That's good for many things. You can decide to go like Chopin. the two voice element, well, one accompaniment, one melody. And then he finishes the first phrase in thirds, two parts in the right hand. So he splits in two, but parallel thirds. So it's not totally contrapuntal, but still it's more than one voice. So how do I know if he wanted to hear the bottom part continue the top, or was it to continue on the top? And perhaps it's neither, in which case it's more objective. Then you have, of course, the 2 against 3 with the left hand wavy accompaniment. And the fact that every 2 eighth notes you play not together, since the first corresponds to the beat, but then the second fits between the second and the third of the 3, so it's 2 against 3. So he makes the passing tone become more meaningful than if it was played alone, where you would have played softer. When you go from F sharp to D sharp, you pass through E. E is a passing tone, so you're not going to accent the E, because it's tasteless to play heavier the passing tone. It's a melodic step motion. But because the second of the 2 eighth notes plays between the second and the third of the left hand, all of a sudden the fact that it's purposely not fitting, but exactly fitting between 2 notes of the left hand, it gives that passing tone of the right hand a sense of intensity rather than a lightness. And then even if alone you would do this, because of the left hand triplet, you feel like you need to build a bridge and therefore play louder the E from the F sharp and push the ending of the phrase further, since every phrase has to have an arrival point, a horizon line towards which you aim, or that's your target. I can think loud voice and think D sharp, B, F sharp, and tell myself what I see when you drive daylight, unlike night, you see way further than only where you drive. But when you're at night, you see nothing but the lights, the headlights distance, so you see just what you see. Therefore, here you can also be just doing it by, and then again, and again, by 3 droppings. Tim pom pom, which is very pretty, except that in the idea of the 2 against 3, he suggests, I believe, that I need to crescendo the second 8th note passing tone rather than play it as a regular, lighter, decorative pattern of passing tone. So, do I read too much into the reason? Is it analytical overreaching for the interpretational choice? Do I really need it as a reason? Do I always choose interpretational expression by analytical facts and therefore explain them to you like I do when I teach? Well, yes, but not all the time. And sometimes the intuition is stronger than the reason for which we do something. And perhaps we should accept that, especially in art forms which are to be brought back alive after they are codified on a paper where they are not resonant by themselves. So if he had written Alberti bass, of course I wouldn't do a crescendo on the passing tone. But because it's 2 against 3, and of course stylistically we know that the Romantic era in the 19th century in Europe was more about breaking the block groups of bar numbers for phrases a la Haydn. It's very clear, it's pre-cut, it's also very symmetrical and all that, but the run-on sentence, the narrative flow, fact, instead of doing a little stop and then here and then here, which could be very pretty in terms of little diminuendi, I would push it further and not diminuendo the melodic line until the F sharp of the dominant, starting on the third of the tonic. And then have this kind of intense, sustained dropping melodically, but not dynamically. And only here make it a little diminuendo, and then start the second phrase and rise. Repeat the D and do my secondary dominant to the dominant, and then the bridge, returning, and again restating the theme. So therefore I would have done 2 phrases before I restate the theme instead of 4 and 4. Now, does it have to be decided ahead of time? Does it have to be defined and marked as a stamp? I'm not sure. Probably in order to create a template in your mind of how you want to structure it while you perform, you need to do that perhaps as a youngster as well as a teacher, to give guideline basis, a mold on which to place your musicianship, so that you don't just zigzag around. And then once all that is said, done, understood, accepted or not, or whatever, wrote down or highlighted by fluo pens, you have to play it. And perhaps you just let it drop, even if you didn't plan to. And then you crescendo only towards the end. And finally diminuendo here. Does it make it better, right or wrong? None. Probably different for sure. And if I expose to you these thought processes of mine, is that I think we all need to reach a point as performers or teachers where, to a certain extent, we have to analyze the texture, the score, the whatever is happening in the music that we think it is, the factual harmonic progressions. But then comes the mystical aspect of the innuendo of expression, dropping, rising, suspension, appoggiatura, all the effects that contribute towards a mood or another. So, okay, you don't want to just play the mood, nor only the structure, because if you play more like a recitant who analytically understood the book, it's almost like reading an article about the book. When you read the book, all of a sudden some sections move you more than they only impress you, perhaps by the way the words are chosen and the way they're organized, or perhaps by the purpose of the story that makes you, I don't know, sad, happy, or any more subtle in-between feeling. And to belittle the piece only to one aspect which might fit your psyche, I think you have to accept to have temporary convictions, and then be capable to rethink outside of the box and say, perhaps I built this hearing understanding of how to rhetorically present that sentence, but I can do it differently because I don't believe in it really. I think perhaps I was too much into that when I could have been more into this. That's something that you do as an introspection when you revisit the score, perhaps through teaching or through recording, and you don't want to stay always, or at least I try not to, rigidly into my convictions because they're reassuring. In a way, it's questioning the status quo. And since Chopin, in the case, imitates a lot of bel canto was part improvised for the famous Soprano divas, while the orchestra was just an accompaniment in the Bellini-style operas that Chopin admired. And in a way, he imitates on the piano. Though we are in a time period after Busoni, Liszt, and the great performers, they were more than performers, they were composers in their own right, but also in part paraphrasers, so to say. They restated it when they transformed the piece for their virtuosity, like the Chaconne of Bach by Busoni, from solo violin to a virtuoso romantic, late romantic piano writing. And in comparison to today's constant search for authenticity and performance practice, which is absolutely essential, not as an end by itself, but as an ingredient towards the analytical understanding of the text. And then at some point, all of this knowledge that you accumulate around the intuition about which you start playing the music in the first place has to blend into your spontaneity. And I think if you don't love the piece more than you understand it, you couldn't do that, because then you would be prisoner of the thoughts, either those who told you to analyze it this way, or you came up to such conclusion, and then you keep repeating it as a teacher or as a performer. And perhaps it shouldn't, perhaps it should, and for sure I think evolves, perhaps towards a dead end, you never know, but it evolves. It's always alive. It gives that beautiful illusion of the ephemeral moment where you feel, well, the listener thinks you improvise when you do everything but. And of course, in performance, nothing happens when you're solo pianist like you planned. Because it's not an orchestra with a conductor who only gives the structure of the pulse and the orchestra plays all the details of the notes. Here, you are the orchestra, you are the conductor, you are the inspiration of the piece that inspired you for the audience that you hope to inspire through the piece. You serve a piece to share it. And at some point you involve yourself, you over-involve yourself. Some people say, oh, you really liked that piece, didn't you? It means to you so much, but it does. The question is, how much of it will I allow to pass through in my performance? Or should I not plan too much because I have to deal with the unexpected of the stage? The piano responds differently, the acoustic is different, my own psychological preparation, and then the way I live intensely that moment might bring me to make a spontaneously irrational choice of phrasing on the spot, and I have to deal with it. Now, what does it mean? It means that I have to make sense of it as if I planned it? Yeah, but sometimes you cannot plan while making it up, because in a way you end up being inconsequential, and then in a recording studio they'll say retake that phrase again until you bring it to its meaningful arrival point. But then it's not only the arrival point that matters, but it has to be a guideline towards which you shape your tempo, your phrasing, the quality of the legato, how much of the pedal. In other words, the whole traction of the energy of the playing goes towards this aim of a phrasing's arrival point. And because of the lack of lyrics, we don't have to worry about breathing between syllables or something. I think it's a possibly impossible question to answer, because in part you would assume that you control everything when you perform in public, but in fact you don't. Most of the time it could be the instrument that tells you what to do. if the action is not fully even and the keys don't respond the way you expected, or because you started on a tempo that, I don't know, you just played another piece before, your heart still beats very fast, you're in the excitement, the adrenaline of the performance, and you play differently than you planned it when you practiced it in your place, having the time to think over it. It's not the same context, not the same intensity of listening. You hear it more intensely in the audience because you are your two ears plus all the other ears listening to you at the same time. Everybody is listening intensely to the beauty of the piece, and you don't want to mess it up because you love it. You serve it, and you don't want to make a fool of yourself. So you have to control your playing. You cannot just rediscover the piece on the spot spontaneously, because then it will bring you to inevitably an accident, because you won't be focused to concentrate ahead. If not thinking ahead at least a bit or two, you will miss the phrasing, the fingering, the something, especially when it goes faster. But let's say in a slow tempo as well. So in a way, yes, you have to deal with the unexpected while you plan, and you let it appear as it displays itself the way it comes the day that you play it, in front of these people in that hall with this piano, and you try to make sense of it on the spot with these variables, compared to if you chose a piano in a studio with a microphone and you make a recording for the soundscape that you chose with a tone engineer. Totally different. And in a way, perhaps more controlled environment compared to the concert, which is also more beautiful in a sense that is perhaps not beautiful, the word. Perhaps it's more exciting because of the ephemeral moment that is so intense and then at the same time so passing and so shared. And I think the heightened attention of the listeners who are holding their breath from making noise because the piece is in a pianissimo or in intensity of expression, you feel that while you play, that it's sort of like you can feel this pregnant rest or this density of the silence, which is in fact attention. People try to avoid coughing or making noise on their chairs. In other words, everybody, performer and audience, are in a focused energy of, towards the, and you hope you're not going to slip, or I don't know, play an accent where you didn't plan it because something happened. Of course, the more you have performance practice in front of stressed situations, which is to play in public, something so intimate, just not natural, you become like an actor. You learn your trade, and so you fake believably. That is the whole idea of theater play. To the point to which you identify yourself so much with the character that you enter in the piece, and you're no more the person who was there before or will be there after. During, you're in the piece, all your life through one note. All the meaning through this phrase that you don't want to end. Very often during the performance, you don't hear what you really produce. You hear what you project to produce, what your inner ear calls you to do for the direction of the behaving of the melodic line in question. And of course, if you listen to a recording made of the performance, then you're no more in the action, and all of a sudden, no more audience, no more action. You just listen to it passively, not intensely, energetically when you played by the very synergy of the playing. I mean, you're in, all of a sudden you start analyzing, I shouldn't have done this, I did too early this, or this retenuto is too much. No, that was, but I thought on the spot, I was just right on. But you were. And I think that defines the meaning of a live performance. You start with all the intensity, with all the drive and inspiration of what the piece means to you that you want to display for the audience. And then on the way, things happen. More or less planned, more than less. And sometimes it's agreeable surprises, because sometimes the little glitch makes the piece take another dimension that you didn't plan in the way to bring the phrasing to its arrival point. In other words, there are different paths through the garden, not just one single. Of course, you pass with a single one every time you practice repetitively until you feel confident enough for having repeated it enough times, so when you play it one time through, it's going to have all the elements of the thought processes that you put into it. But then it might be not. If you're slightly not as concentrated, or there is some distraction, or perhaps just the piece itself, or the situation of the performance, and all of a sudden afterwards you can say, oh, I planned to do that, but so little of my intentions came to fruition during the performance according to what I hear objectively after it in the recording. Because while you play, you really don't hear what you do. Or if you do, you shouldn't do too much. It's like driving, watching the rear mirror. No, of course, you have to be aware of the cars behind you, but you still watch in front of where you go. So you're always projecting yourself to a certain distance in front of you where you're not yet, but you're going to. And even if you know the path through the whole way. And then from time to time, something happens that even if you take it every day, that path, something else goes through that happens. I don't know, sunlight, sunshine, sunset, rain, I don't know, something. And all of a sudden, the texture of the place is different. The pedal sounds longer. I don't know. You cannot start again and again in front of the audience until you find it the perfect way to express, in your opinion, a sentence. That's what you do in recordings. And overindulge in recordings, because then you only play for the piece itself. Whenever here, you take the piece and you bring it to the audience. So it's the piece as a hyphen between you and the audience, you being the hyphen between the composer and the audience. But when you record the piece without audience, you play directly for the piece. Therefore, you address yourself to the composer. What did you really want? Am I doing what you wished? But to me, it means more this way. Of course, it's a one-way conversation all the time with the dead composers that we play, like Chopin. And strangely, during the performance, they're incredibly present in our psyches. Like when you dream and you think is real, because you don't know that you're dreaming until you wake up, that you dreamt. And this kind of daydreaming quality of the performance in public, where you abandon yourself through the piece to the music that which vehicles all these psychological elements that connect you to an audience through the piece. It's not about you, it's not about them, it's about the piece. And what the piece brings you as an inspiration to share with them in the mood, the atmosphere, whatever it is that it carries, as well as the thought processes of the development of the phrase. That's why it's different if you start and you do this dropping already, then you re-rise, you re-drop, and then you rise and you drop on the dominant, compared to if you don't drop until the dominant. Phrase, but of course then you have less of the dynamic contrasts, and then it depends on the left hand's arpeggiated pattern of accompaniment that Chopin writes, plus the rhythmicity of the 2 against 3, purposely artistically not fitting half of the time between the two hands. He hints everything in the writing, in the notation rather, yet there's always that aspect that remains, this variable adjustment that happens on the spot. And then sometimes you feel like bringing a little accelerando, not even, that's too much, a hint is an exaggeration, perhaps in the rubato, the stilling of time, a certain need to reach impatiently the note that is so lovely. When you go, I want to go to you, and you feel like you're expressing some kind of imaginary lyrics, even if they sound cheesy, but they bring you in the mood, you enter in the character. at that point you don't know what was the next phrase, then you could, if you want, but most people would stop, you could improvise something. Of course, anything you will do after that is not his will be bad, because everybody knows the piece. And they'll say, oh, of course, he wrote better. Yours is cheesy, yours is repetitive, or yours is too guessable. In other words, predictability is not what the composer is for. He's there to charm you and surprise you as well as entice you. And sometimes reassure you too. It's... But even if you play exactly what he wrote after, there's still room for you to create through rubato or voicing or both some kind of a flow that brings up earlier the dominant chord on the minor key. And then only relax at the cadence. And then repick the tempo in the bridge. And restate the theme with the octaves. All that is written by him, you don't make it up. But the way it starts with a single note and in the restatement is in the octaves. He already orchestrated it, so to say, by the tutti versus the solo. So you carry this in your honest, earnest playing, because you play what's written. So you could say, and many people do, that it's more of a craftsmanship than artistry. I'm not supposed to rewrite or reimagine the piece. I just have to perform it like carving an object with good craftsmanship. And the artistry comes out of when the craftsmanship is well done. And that is morally very appealing. Like, who am I to add my own, let's say, ingredient to this marvelous sauce that he cooked so well, and all I have to do is just cook it according to the recipe, and it's going to be best because that's what he wrote. And if I do, I'll have to write my own piece. But I cannot, or should not, or should I, add my little grain of salt into it. Because it's me, the day I played, compared to the others who played it before and the others who played after me. I am nothing, the piece is everything, but I still am there. I am the one who plays it. And if it means to me so much, perhaps my intuition will override my analytical mind, and I'll let myself go into spontaneity. Left hand is an accompaniment, but it's so beautifully designed that you want to bring it also, saying even the accompaniment in Chopin is appealing compared to the long values of the melodic lines in the right hand. By the time you bring and this and that and everything, then you have to make a choice. The soundscape. And if you bring this, and then this, and this, then it becomes busy, and to the point to which you play on the piano, which already has a decay, you sound messy or inconsequent, or at least, I mean, it's good. All the notes are there, but it lacks that layered, voiced, colorized, three-dimensionalized treatment of the texture with a hierarchy of melodic importance and accompaniment patterns and secondary voices. And the second bridge brings to a third reinstatement. Statements, Chopin adds more decorations, more repeated notes, more effects, And so you can think, okay, I have to start then much simpler in order to have room to grow into the excitement, without which if I play so intense at the first iteration, then when it comes a third time, I'll be probably banging, because I cannot play louder than loud on the piano. It's a percussive instrument. I have to enter deep in the keys from close up with support in the palm that allows me to free the natural weight of the elbow that comes from the shoulder, and that allows me to give that grand sound that is warm, lyrical, meaningful, expressive, intense, and tender at the same time. Or at least I try to, even if the piano doesn't respond the way I wish. Well, of course, that's what pianists are. We play on what is there. And then we try to make it into, shape it like sculptors into what we want the raw material to be shaped into, with the phrasing, of course, the pedal and the, well, we have, compared to a singer who is just alone in front of the audience with their own self, we have some, like the pedal is an enhancer, sometimes a muddier, because of course you lift all the dampers, so you hear muddier, but then you hear resonant if it's too dry. And when you're alone, you can change the tempo as you like if you need to, or you shouldn't, but perhaps you can adjust in the rubato compared to chamber orchestra or chamber music playing, where you have to be always coordinating with the others so you don't get off sync. It's a whole other story about chamber music. Is it to play together towards a given line? Of course, it's not encouraging not to play together on the way there to the arrival point, but still the spontaneity of each would be making it messy. So you have to organize it, but still keep a certain spontaneity. But when you're playing by yourself, you can allow yourself to do something on the spur of the moment. You might regret it, but if it's in your character, if you respond like that to the piece with the adrenaline of the moment of the performance, why not? After all, this is why live music is so exciting, is because it's not just reciting correctly, it's also beyond that. It's restating it for what it means to you, the way it happens to be presenting itself or appearing in front of you when you play it. So you give the illusion to yourself and to the audience that you are in charge of what you do. You really know you're not. Even if with the age, I can say yes, of course. Having been around, you know how to be a little bit more aware of the unexpected. But the unexpected inevitably happens, one way or the other, regardless of how many flying hours you have of knowledge, because somehow every time you take this beautiful trip through the piece, psychologically, emotionally, technically, things go differently. Things go the way they're supposed to go on that point, regardless how much you've repeated and rehearsed to sort of organize it so that you're in charted territory while you played. But if it's too charted and you're too much into what was decided or planned, you would lack that spontaneity, and the audience will feel that you're at best cautious, at worst boring. I mean, it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's just enough. You don't have to do more. You don't have to save the piece. The piece is there because it's a masterpiece. You love it, you serve it, they love it, they listen to it, they're disappointed the way you played it, they think they'll do it better. Fine, that's what happens in competitions, in concerts. Or if they don't know the piece, they'll perhaps like it because of you. They don't know it besides you. They know it only through you, and then you become the vector for them liking the piece as a, let's say, amateur listeners, or just music lovers. Because when you know, you can compare. When you compare, you can say the tempo, the phrasing, I didn't like the way this and that did it, I prefer it this and this, that. Fine, but also it's very good, because then you become knowledgeable. But generally, you play for a mixed bag of audience. Not everybody is a musicologist or scholar in the audience, nor all of them know nothing. In fact, it's a good mix. And I think the reason for which is a good mix is because I think you should not think of how they hear you. You should think of what you want them to hear from what you produce, through what the piece means to you. Adaptative conviction. And let the piece always not surprise you, perhaps, but though in part, yes, the piece is so marvelous, and you just go, oh God, it's so beautiful. I don't know what it means exactly. I thought this and that to get to this and that, but forget it. Just let it speak, let it sing, let it do its thing. Don't bother it. Don't overfill it with what it means to you on the way bringing it to your audience. It's a very subtle amount of objectivity with subjectivity on the spot when you're performing. Perhaps you feel more in the center of the attention for the wrong reasons, because in fact the center of the attention is the piece. But the piece without the performer is not alive during the performance. So there is some kind of a messenger and message combination that charms, inspires, touches, moves, or perhaps angries audience members. It's not supposed to be played like that, or God, I've never liked it like this before, but that's really the way perhaps I like it, or I didn't think it's possible to be this way. It's too slow. No, it's too fast. Or too much rubato, not enough. Chopin's melody, but no, Chopin is also the harmony. Or the pedal in Chopin, it's so special because the left hand this and the right hand that, and if you put too much for the harmony, you don't have the melody, and then the melody becomes blurred. And if not, it's too dry if you do it all finger pedal. I spend my life trying to find the right balance of the ingredients, either when I play, either, of course, when I teach for the students, to find their own reinstatement of the piece when they'll play it, with their own convictions built on what I try to reveal them from the score, or they already know by their intuition or their own analysis of the score. And perhaps a fingering brings better this shape, and another fingering less the other shape, and the passing tone and the phrasing, and then what you want to do will take a certain fingering to shape it compared to another, given the topography of the terrain and the given key that the composer wrote it in. So once you've given all these information or possibly advice, and who knows how much more in the teaching, the student is no more a student in the sense the student plays it directly for their own audience and restates it through their own psyche, with their own understanding, perhaps partially from yours, but not totally, and perhaps sometimes none. I don't like it the way he likes it. That's fine. You don't have to always explain. But I still think that to a certain extent, if you voice or you bring out in different touches the different aspects of a melodic line within passing tones and the leading tone, which is a more meaningful tone, and then the appoggiatura, and not for another from above, appoggiare. In a way, you taint it by your own voicing, and you oblige the listener to follow one or the other of the shadow light, chiaroscuro voicing that you produce. I love when it happens spontaneously on the spot, and sometimes it's hard to not, because it's as if the piece is not just the recitation of this dead scroll. It becomes alive as if you invent it on the spot, but you know you're not. So the more you serve it, the more you think outside of the box, the more you in fact serve it meaningfully. Regardless if you sound like the others playing it or if you sound unlike the others playing it, because you hear it when you read it differently than others. And it's not to be original for the sake of it. It's about responding to what is your inner musical hearing, how much you hear, how much you analyze, how much you understand, and how much you can reproduce from what the score says to the audience at the performance moment, with the stress and the excitement and the anxiety and the listening attention. In other words, you only know the piece once you've played it in front of the audience. It's like as if you brought it out from the canvas on which you worked on in the atelier, yes, in the practice room. Then it truly comes alive. might bite you, it might caress you when you play it, so to say, musically, but then you start knowing what and how to display it the next time you will play it in front of the audience. You'll remember some things from that first performance of it that you want to correct the next performance of it, whenever that will be. And sometimes you forget, but most of the time it comes back in the subconscious almost. And then you build up that as an experience. Probably that's what experience is. But if it's only too much of that, then it becomes pedantic and you start playing it only because you control it. In fact, you should control it to the point to which you let it live on its own, and you don't squeeze control it. You just control it, but you allow it to do some zigzagging. In that sense, it becomes an expressive prose, something believable because spontaneous, even if it's exactly the words of the text of the famous play. Yeah. I always believe so much in the fact that a performer on the piano, interpreter, is really an actor, telling a text through their own understanding of it.